Hi all, welcome to another interesting paper discussion video in Research PhD for All. In this video, I want to use an old paper to talk about something current. This kind of shows that research output lives forever. So, since abortion is a huge topic of interest after the reversal of Roe v. Wade, I thought about talking about a research on abortion, which is something very timely for the moment. As we all know, Roe v. Wade was a landmark decision in 1973 from the US Supreme Court, which said that the Constitution of the United States generally protects a pregnant woman's liberty to choose to have an abortion. 50 years later, the Supreme Court, in many ways, walked backwards to rescind that protection at the federal level. However, such protection can still be applied at the state level. In fact, as of this writing, many states still guarantee a woman's right to abortion, while some have restrictive laws, including some with trigger laws that activate after the recent decision. As of this video, abortion access in the country looks something like the chart in the screen. Let's take a step away from politics for a moment and discuss this cool paper from a while back, which is 2001, about 20 years ago, that discusses the impact of legalized abortion on crime. Sometimes policies designed for a specific issue have a second-order impact, which is generally referred to as an externality. Abortion in this case was granted for the reproductive health and autonomy of women, but it ended up with a positive externality, a beneficial second-order outcome, and that positive externality is a reduction in crime. This paper was written by John J. Donohue III and Stephen D. Levitt. It was published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. I'll put a link to the paper and journal in the description. So let's start with a brief summary or abstract about what we're about to learn. Almost all papers and journals have a brief summary or abstract of what they contain towards the beginning of the paper. This is about as consistent as the structure of the paper itself. So on to the abstract. The authors provide evidence that abortion legalization led to a reduction in crime. They find a drop in crime roughly 18 years after legalization. They find that states with high abortion rates in the 70s and 80s had higher drop in crime in the 90s. Legalization of abortion accounts for as much as 50% of the drop in crime. As before, next is the structure. The paper is divided into the following sections. It starts with introduction into the issue, then it talks about the history of legalized abortion, then it talks about the mechanism with which abortion can lead to a reduction in crime rates, then it provides empirical evidence of the claim with data and statistical analysis, and finally, it concludes. Now let's jump into the paper, starting with the introduction. The introduction section provides motivation and a detailed summary of the contents of the paper. Most of the important arguments in the introduction will be discussed in greater detail later in the appropriate section. In the last decade of the 20th century, the United States experienced a sharp drop in murder rates. Just a quick note here, since this paper was published in 2001, you have to take everything in this paper with the context of the issues of the time. These papers usually take about 3 to 5 years from the start to publication. There's a margin of error here, so that's about the type of context you need to consider when assessing the way the paper was written. Homicides fell by over 40%, violent and property fell by over 30%. Among the explanation offered are the increasing use of incarceration, growth in the number of police, improved policing strategies, such as those adopted in New York, which is controversial in itself, declines in crack cocaine trade, the strong economy, and increased expenditures in victim precautions, such as security guards and alarms. The authors, however, aren't satisfied with these arguments, because most of these were in place even before the 1990s, and some places haven't even changed their policies like the ones mentioned above. The authors propose that the decision to legalize abortion in 1973 by the Supreme Court potentially fits the criteria for explaining a large, abrupt, and continuing decrease in crime. About 1.6 million abortions were performed per year 7 years after Roe v. Wade. That's 1 for every 2 live births. The legalization of abortion in 5 states in 1970 and then for the nation as a whole in 1973 could be the abrupt policy changes leading to abrupt impact on crime 15 to 20 years later. The reason we use 15 to 20 years is because that's high crime years for humans. This effect will accumulate over time, which explains why crime keeps falling. For potential channels, the authors propose a reduction in cohort sizes, women who abort, being most at risk, like teenagers, unwed, economically disadvantaged, who give birth to criminally inclined children. Now women can optimize the timing of child such that they can nurture them to be their best self, and we'll come back and pick each one of them apart in the mechanism section. Statistics of crime rate fits well with this theory. Crime rate starts dropping around 1992, which is when the post-legalization kids are between 18 to 24 years. And that's their peak crime years. In addition, statistics for the 5 states that legalized in 1970 saw an earlier decline than those 45 who did it in 1973. The formal analysis in the paper shows that higher rates of abortion in a state in the 1970s and early 80s are strongly linked to lower crime over the period from 1985 to 1997. This finding is true after controlling for a variety of factors that could potentially influence crime, such as the level of incarceration, the number of police, and measures of the state's economic well-being, like unemployment rate, income per capita, and property rates. The estimates from this paper suggest legalized abortion can account for about half the drop in crime between 1991 and 1997. But is this causal? This is one of the biggest challenges in social sciences. In natural sciences, it is easy to run a control experiment in vacuum to check for causality. For example, does the use of a chemical lead to a certain chemical reaction? You can put the chemical in vacuum and check if it happens. You have the ability to control almost everything to check for causality. In social sciences, however, it is very difficult to run isolated experiments. While there are researchers who do that, many use data and a broad range of statistical tools to see if they can find causality. Then we try to use robustness checks to verify that the results do stand when we look at things from a different lens. In this paper, we will get to see some of the tools we use in social science to establish causality. The authors argue that the link is causal because they point that all reduction in crime comes after the abortion kits come of age and nothing before that. Since abortion is a controversial topic, even right now, can you imagine how controversial it was back in 2001? The authors put a disclaimer saying that they are not making an analysis of whether abortion is good or bad, but rather an investigation into why crime fell. So this falls onto a positive and not a normative analysis. Positive analysis uses scientific principles to arrive at objective, testable conclusions. In many cases, these can be factual statements. Normative analysis, however, is making recommendations on what should be taken or taken a perspective. This could use factual evidence as support. For example, saying inflation is 5, 7, or 10% is positive analysis, while saying inflation is high, low, good, bad is normative. Now let's look at the background of the issue with an overview of the history of legalized abortion. In background section, they usually present the history of the issue or what the existing literature says about the issue. This way, the authors try to express where their research fits in the broader research narrative. Going back to history of legalized abortion, English common law is where abortion comes from. English common law allowed abortion prior to quickening, which is when the first movement of the fetus is felt. That's approximately 16 to 18 weeks of pregnancy. The US had the same law until 1828, when New York made it illegal. And by 1900, it was illegal throughout the country. Liberalization began around 1967 to 1970, with 1962 amendments to the Model Penal Code, which provided for prevention of death or grave impairment of the woman, or if the fetus would have grave physical or mental defect, or in cases of rape or incest. These provisions were adopted in 1967 in Colorado, North Carolina, and California. In 1968, in Florida, Georgia, and Maryland. In 1969, in Arkansas, Kansas, New Mexico, and Oregon. And in 1970, in Delaware, South Carolina, and Virginia, which makes a total of 13 states. Legal abortion was available in 5 states in 1970, when New York, Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii repealed their anti-abortion laws. And the Supreme Court of California, ruling in late 1969, held that the state's law banning abortion was unconstitutional. On January 22, 1973, Roe v. Wade extended it to the entire nation. A quote from the original verdict itself: "The detriment that the state would impose upon the pregnant woman by denying this choice is altogether apparent. Specific and direct harm, medically diagnosable, even in early pregnancy, may be involved. Maternity or additional offspring may force upon the woman a distressful life and future. Psychological harm may be imminent. mental and physical health may be taxed by childcare. There is also the distress for all concerned associated with the unwanted child, and there is a problem of bringing a child into a family already unable, psychologically and otherwise, to care for it. Following legalization, the total number of abortions increased from 750,000 in 1973, when live births totaled 3.1 million, to over 1.6 million in 1980, when live births totaled 3.6 million. And here's a chart that shows the evolution of abortion. The cost of abortion also dropped from $400 to $500 when it was illegal to as little as $80. 13 years after the decision. Self-reported data on pregnancy outcome histories also indicate an increase in abortion. These evidence meet the first prerequisite that legalization did increase abortion rates. There was also a dramatic decline in the number of children being put up for adoption. According to Solly, 1993, almost 9% of premarital births were placed for adoption before 1973. That number fell to 4% for births occurring between 1973 and 1981. The total number of adoptions rose from 90,000 in 1957 to over 170,000 in 1970. By 1975, adoptions had fallen to 130,000. Now, let's jump into the mechanism with which abortion legalization could reduce crime rates. So what this section is going to do is it's going to explore the theoretical link between abortion legalization and a drop in crime 15 to 20 years post-legalization. In papers with the statistical analysis, it is important to present theoretical connections as well. We can compute correlation coefficient for any two variables. Hey, you can even generate random data and generate correlation coefficient, or run regression too with significant estimates. However, a good paper will not just show coefficient estimates from a regression, but also the way with which the causal effect is occurring. It is preferable that the paper provide statistical support to the mechanism as well. Now, going back to the mechanism, the first one is reduced birth rates. Levitt and co-authors in 1996 find that legalization is associated with roughly a 5% drop in birth rates. Even if the drop in birth is random kids, the total number of crime will fall just because now there are less adults. But the possibility is high that abortion has a disproportionate impact on births of those who are most at risk of engaging in criminal behavior. This is important because research shows that 6% of any birth cohort will commit roughly half the crime. Levitt and co-authors in 1996 also estimate that the drop in births was roughly twice as great for teenage and non-white mothers as it was for non-teen white population. In the years immediately following Roe v. Wade, data from the CDC indicate that almost 1/3 of abortion were performed on teenagers. Angrist and Evans in 1996 found that while abortion reforms had relatively modest effects on the fertility of white women, black women who were exposed to abortion reforms experienced large reduction in teen fertility and teen out-of-wedlock fertility. Gruber, Levin, and Steger in 1999 conclude that the average living circumstances of cohorts born immediately after abortion became legalized improved substantially relative to preceding cohorts. They go on to know that the marginal children who were not born as a result of abortion legalization would have systematically been born into less favorable circumstances if the pregnancies had not been terminated. They would have been 60% more likely to live in a single-parent household, 50% more likely to live in poverty, 45% more likely to be in a household collecting welfare, and 40% more likely to die during the first year of life. A lot of research has shown that adverse family environment is strongly linked to future criminality. It is possible that abortion could reduce the number of children born under these circumstances. Teenagers who have abortion can get more education before they give birth and may delay childbearing until they are married or want a child or both. In an array of studies in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia, DAG in 1999 found that the children who were born because their mothers were denied an abortion were substantially more likely to be involved in crime and have poorer life prospects even when controlling for income, age, education, and health of the mother. The authors then go on to provide some back-of-the-envelope calculation of expected magnitude of the impact of abortion legalization on crime. Their analysis includes 4 variables: race, teenage motherhood, unmarried motherhood, and unwantedness. They use data from the 1990 census to calculate estimates in 8 separate categories. For example, white children born to teenage mothers growing up in single-parent household, or Black children born to non-teenage mothers growing up in two-parent household, and so on and so on, to make 8 categories. They combine estimates of what proportion of birth in absence of legalized abortion from Levin and co-authors from 1996 and Rassanen and co-authors in 1999 and observed frequencies of crime by race in the United States to produce estimates of hypothetical reduction in crime. Finally, using assumption that 75% of unwanted births are aborted, and this number appears to be consistent with data from self-reported pregnancy histories, they estimate the contribution to lower crime from fewer unwanted births. Through a purely mechanical relationship, the 5.4% overall post-legalization decline in cohort size obtained by Levin and co-authors in 1996 translates into a 5.4% reduction in homicide. Now, Black women experience 3 times greater fertility decline than white women, 12-4. Given that homicide rates of Black youths are roughly 9 times higher than those of white youths, assuming eliminated births for both races experience average criminal propensities of its respective races, then the predicted reduction in homicide is 8.9%, a jump from the initial 5.4%. Teenagers and unwed women experience greater reduction in fertility. Accounting for these two raises the impact from 8.9% to 12.5%. Adjusting for unwantedness raises the estimate from 12.5% to 18.5%. As of 1997, roughly 60% of crimes were committed by individuals born after legalized abortion, implying that thus far the hypothetical impact of abortion on crime is only 60% of the impact on the affected cohorts, or about an 11% reduction. To the extent that other factors are correlated with both criminal propensity and abortion likelihoods, for example, poverty, maternal education, religiosity, this rough estimate is likely to understate the true impact. If you contrast with the observed decline in crime rates in the 90s of 30 to 40%, abortion is an important factor in explaining the drop in crime. Now let's look at the empirical evidence, which I think is the meat of the paper. So far, everything we've done is looking at the bones. Empirical evidence teaches us the techniques of how to derive these results. And the authors do that by empirically establishing a relationship between crime change in the 90s and legalized abortion in the early 70s. So this is how they begin the empirical evidence. They consider data from 3 sources: the national time series of crime and abortion, differential crime patterns across early legalizers and other states, and the impact of state abortion rates properly lagged on state crime rates. Figure 2 on the screen presents per capita crime rates for the United States for violent crime, property crime, and murder for the period 1973 to 1999, as measured in the Uniform Crime Reports compiled by the FBI. We see an increase in crime before 1990, then a sharp drop consistent with the story presented so far. Next, the National Crime Victimization Survey, NCVS, gathers information on self-reported crime victimization and offers another perspective on national crime patterns, which is presented in Figure 3. While this chart is not identical to UCR chart, it is consistent with our story of decline in crime in the 90s. To formalize the gradual impact of legalization on crime, they define a new variable, effective legalized abortion rate, relevant to crime in year T, as the weighted average legalized abortion rate across all cohorts of arrestees. In the formula you see on the score, T indexes years and A indexes the age of the cohort. Abortion is the number of abortion per live birth, and the ratio of arrest inside the parentheses is the fraction of arrest for a given crime involving members of cohort A. If legalized abortion reduces crime, then crime should continue to fall, all else equal, as long as the effective abortion rate is rising. Next, let's compare crime trends between early legalizing states and the rest of the country. Early legalizing, again, are Alaska, California, Hawaii, New York, and Washington. And they did that around 1970 compared to the entire country starting 1973. The fundamental logic here is that early legalizing states only have a 3-year head start on reduction in crime. Table 1 on the screen presents a comparison of crime trends in early legalizing and all other states. As shown in the bottom panel of Table 1, by 1988, the effective abortion rate for violent crime in early legalizing states was 64, compared with 10.4 in the rest of the United States. To explore whether crime rates began to respond to early abortion legalization between 1982 and 1988, look at the rows labeled Difference in the 1982 to 1988 column. The negative sign for this difference suggests that crime fell faster in the states that legalized abortion earlier. Here, we do see a differential impact on property crime, but not so much on the violent and murder crimes. Everything so far has been suggestive evidence. Now let's move on to something more systematic, starting with state abortion rates after legalization to state-level changes in crime over a panel of yearly data from 1985 through 1997. Before presenting the regression results, the figures on the screen, figure A through C, shows simple plots of log changes in crime rates between 1985 and 1997 against the change in state-level effective abortion rate over the same time period. There is a clear negative relationship here. This raw relationship between abortion rate in the 1970s and falling crime in the 1990s emerges even more clearly in Table 2. For the period 1985 to 1997, for each category, crime rates fell more for high abortion states relative to low by at least 30 percentage points. Next, we look at some regressions. The paper uses panel data to run something called a fixed effects difference in differences estimation to estimate the impact of abortion on crime rates. In a future video, I can elaborate more on what the difference in differences does, but it is one of the most important techniques in statistics, especially in social science research, to estimate causality. Before the regression itself, let's see what the summary statistics of the data looks like. We do this to see if everything checks out and nothing is funky in the dataset. They use this panel dataset to run the following regression. In the equation that you see on the screen, S indexes states and T reflects time. The left-hand side variable is the relevant logged crime rates. Crime rates are usually logged in regression because it's a count variable. Our measure of abortion is the effective abortion rate defined earlier for a given state, year, and crime category. X is a vector of state-level controls that includes prisoners and police per capita, a range of variables capturing state economic conditions, lagged state welfare generosity, the presence of concealed handgun laws, and per capita beer consumption. We control for these variables because any of these variables could potentially impact crime rates. Gamma S and lambda T represent state and year fixed effects. We use them in the regression to account for anything else going on in that state or at that time. All regressions are weighted least squares with weights based on state population. Table 4 presents the regression results with different specifications to show how sensitive the estimates are. The top row of the table presents the coefficients on abortion variable across different specifications. In all 6 cases, the coefficient is negative, implying that higher abortion rates are associated with declining crime. The size of the standard errors reported in parentheses shows that the estimates are highly significant, which in layman's terms means that the likelihood of this estimate coming out of chance, like being lucky, is very low. In a future video, I can talk more about what statistical significance means. Honestly, there must be like a million YouTube videos that explains statistical significance. Now let's evaluate the meaning of these estimates. An increase in the effective abortion rate of 100 per 1,000 live births is associated with a reduction of 12% in murder, 13% in violent crime, and 9% in property crime. In Table 2, comparing the states in the top third with respect to abortions of the states in the bottom third, our parameter estimates imply that crime fell an additional 16 to 25% in the former states by 1997 due to greater uses of abortion. One additional abortion is associated with a reduction of 0.23 property crimes, 0.04 violent crimes, and 0.004 murders annually when a cohort is at its peak crime age. Comparing these estimates to average criminal propensity among 18 to 24-year-olds, those on the margin for being aborted are roughly 4 times more criminal. These estimates are roughly consistent, but somewhat larger than the back-of-the-envelope predictions that we did in Section 3. Other coefficients are also behaving as you would expect. The next table, Table 5, investigates the sensitivity of the abortion coefficient to a range of alternative specification. Each row of the table represents a different specification. They have tried dropping individual big states to make sure that one state is not influencing the estimates, including additional controls, unweighted panel data, using controls for fertility rates, and long differences. These are called robustness checks. These estimates show that our results stay consistent no matter how we look at the data. Now, let's look at the impact of abortion on arrest by age of offender. Can we use arrest patterns to substantiate a possible causal interpretation of the results that we have produced so far? In particular, if legalized abortion is the reason for the decline in crime, then one would expect that decreases in crime should be concentrated among those cohorts born after abortion is legalized. This can be complicated because age of criminals is not observable, but age of arrestees is. The basic specifications used to explain state arrest rates by age category are identical to the crime regression in the preceding section, except that the dependent variable is the natural log of the arrest rate per capita for those under age 25, rather than the overall crime rates for all ages. Table 6 presents the results of the estimation. Two specifications per crime category are presented. The top row of results just includes the effective abortion variable and year and state fixed effects, while the bottom row adds to these the remaining covariates that we used in table 4 above. Because the dependent variable is denominated by the population under age 25, the abortion coefficient only reflects changes in arrest rates per person. If the impact of abortion was solely through changes in cohort sizes, then the per capita specification we run would yield 0 coefficient on the abortion variable. The table shows a decline in arrest rates for under 25, but no such impact on over 25, which supports the story in the paper. The implied magnitude of the abortion effects on arrests is smaller than the parallel estimates presented in the preceding section analyzing crime rates, but is of the same order of magnitude. As a further test, they analyze arrest rates for individual years between 15 and 24, covering the period 1985 to 1996. If abortion legalization reduces crime, then we should see the reduction begin with, say, 15-year-olds about 16 years after legalization, then extend to 16-year-olds a year later, and so on. And here is the regression that they run. The equation that you see on the screen has S, T, and B indexing state, year, and birth cohort respectively. The variable arrests is the raw number of arrests for a given crime. As our measure of the abortion rate for a particular cohort, we use the abortion rate in the current state of residence in the calendar year most likely to have preceded the arrestee's birth. Because the unit of observation in the analysis is a state birth cohort and cohorts are observed repeatedly over time, we will include controls for age, national year cohort interaction, state year interactions, and in some cases, state age interactions. Table 7 presents the results of this analysis. Table 7 shows that when the abortion coefficient is allowed to vary by age, 38 of the 40 parameter estimates are negative. More than 2/3 of these estimates are statistically significant at the 5% level. The greatest impact of abortion appears to occur in the age range 18 to 22, which makes sense. The effects are generally weakest for the youngest ages in the sample. And that was all the analysis in the paper. Now on to conclusion. This paper looks to study the impact of legalized abortion on crime rates. We know that teenagers, unmarried women, and poor women are most likely to deem a pregnancy to be either mistimed or unwanted, and that a large proportion of these unintended pregnancies will be terminated through abortion. We also know that early childbearing may have negative consequences on the health, social, and economic well-being of the child, besides the obvious disadvantage brought on by other socioeconomic variables of the mother. This means the future of the children born because the mother had no access to abortion looks bleak. As abortion was legalized, proportion of unwanted births in the 70s and 80s decreased. This paper shows evidence that legalized abortion reduced crime rates with a 20-year lag. These results suggest that an increase of 100 abortions per 1,000 live births reduces the cohort's crime by roughly 10%. Extrapolating the results out of sample to a counterfactual in which abortion remained illegal and the number of illegal abortions performed remained steady at the 1960s level, they estimate that with average national effective abortion rate in 1997 for all three crimes ranging from between 142 and 252, crime was almost 15 to 25% lower in 1997 than it would have been absent legalized abortion. Evidence here suggests that legalized abortion may account for as much as 1/2 of overall crime reduction. Assuming that this claim is correct, existing estimates of the cost of crime, example Miller, Cohen, and Rossman paper in 1993, suggesting that social benefit to reduce crime as a result of abortion may be on the order of $30 billion annually. Increased imprisonment between 1991 and 1997. The prison population rose about 50% over this period, lowered crime by about 10%. Thus, combining abortion and prison growth explain much, if not all, of the decrease in crime. This means that as abortion stays legal, crime will continue to fall. Again, reference to 2001 as the index year for the paper. So the paper is predicting that the crime will fall beyond 2001. Their results suggest that all else equal, legalized abortion will account for persistent declines of 1% a year in crime over the next 2 decades, which is until 2020. With the power of being in the future, we can see that crime did continue to fall post-2001. The chart, however, is only anecdotal evidence. We're going to have to use data and estimation methods in the paper to verify if it actually did before we make any causal claims. Again, because of the controversial nature of the topic, the authors re-mention their non-endorsement of abortion. They say that while falling crime rates are no doubt a positive development, our drawing a link between falling crime and legalized abortion should not be misinterpreted as either an endorsement of abortion or a call for intervention by the state in the fertility decisions of women. Furthermore, equivalent reductions in crime could in principle be obtained through alternatives for abortion, such as more effective birth control or providing better environments for those children at greatest risk for future crime. Now, this could be both the author's personal decision or could have been forced by the editor or referees during the peer review process. Not to mention, it is important to be impartial when conducting a scientific investigation. Everyone has their own priors and biases, but to the extent possible, you need to be neutral with your investigation. You don't want your biases to skew your results. Remember, your objective is to seek truth, no matter what it may be. Using the truth, you may take appropriate actions depending on your preferences. Now, one more point before I wrap it up. Does this mean crime will rise now that the abortion is not legal at the federal level? Now, this is what the paper would predict. However, you need to first pay attention to the graphic 1 presented earlier, and that's on your screen right now. It is not all illegal the way it was before. There are states with time limits on when it is allowed and when it is not. It is also convenient now to travel to another state where it is legal, and people are well aware of it. Contraceptives are widely available, and a lot of people actually use it. Besides, I'd like to think we as a society have also evolved. That is, those born with disadvantages do not have to become criminals. However, ain't no telling what the future holds. This is something we have to wait for our future research to find out. Maybe one of you watching this video may produce that research. Hey, I'm going to pat my back right now to have inspired you. So this was just a brief summary of a very interesting paper. Please read the full paper to understand all the nuances of the study. Lastly, before I wrap up, a quick disclaimer again. The video is for information purposes only. This is not a legal advice or advice in professional capacity. I am not affiliated with the authors or the organization producing research or the journals. This is my interpretation of the paper. Some statements are direct quotes from the paper. Depending on the context, there may be laws around necessary licenses or training or permissions required to conduct the research. There's also always more to research than what's written on the published paper. I'm only trying to interpret what's provided in the published paper. There may be nuances behind this research that may not be explicit while reading the published version. Things do get cut and edited during the peer review process, so caution is advised. The copyright to this paper is owned by the publisher and or the authors. Please reach out to them for more information. I'm putting a link to the original paper in the description. Hope you enjoyed it. I will be back with another fun and informative paper in the next video. Please do like, subscribe, and comment to let me know if you want more papers on abortion, and I will get to work. Also, let me know if you want to talk more detail about the statistical techniques used in the paper. The technique part is something I would like to focus more on as I do more papers.